לפני מלך.
Ready to go. Erev Tov, Chodesh Tov. Continuing our discussion regarding the Beis Hamikdash, which originates here in Parshas Truma. So the first Beis Hamikdash underwent a major refurbishing approximately 280, 290 years after Shlomo HaMelech built it. Through Melech Yoash. And he created a great fund for the Bedek Habayis, he called it, the strengthening of the house. And this was all donations. It was not the government, it was not the king. It was, again, like the Mishkan, donations. He put a pushka up at the entrance to the Beit HaMikdash, and whoever wanted to give, gave. The only thing is that for various reasons, the Kohanim did not encourage people to give. Part of the reason the Tanakh itself implies is because there were very stringent accounting requirements. And that the Kohanim were not that enthusiastic about having to fulfill those requirements. So they did not press the people to give. Until finally the accounting requirements were removed and the Kohanim took a more active role, and enough money was collected that the Beit HaMikdash was refurbished. But it was the layout was never changed. What they did is they strengthened the walls. Whatever the floors, whatever had to be done. You can imagine a building that's a few hundred years old needs refurbishment. The air conditioning didn't work, and there's a few other things they had. So that was the Bedek Habayis. After 410 years from the time that Shlomo built the Beis HaMikdash, the first Churban occurred, and the building was destroyed. Now the question is, how much of the building was destroyed? Sorry. The Tanakh doesn't describe for us, but since part of the Beit HaMikdash was wood, the first Beit HaMikdash, cedars of Lebanon, etc., so it was not a fireproof building, and it was destroyed. 70 years later, when Ezra returns and Nehemiah, so the ruins of the Beit HaMikdash are still there. And the Mokom HaMizbeach, the place of the altar, is known. So the first thing is that the altar is rebuilt because the Mizbeach is not dependent on the rest of the building. In fact, there are shittas today, there's some Sofer and others, that if we knew where the Mokom HaMizbeach is exactly, then we could bring the Korban Pesach today. And right after the 6-Day War, Rav Goren went searching for the Mokom HaMizbeach, and he said that he found it. It's not clear, though. There are many different shittas, and even amongst the archaeologists, there's no unanimity. But the Mizbeach can operate independently of the rest of the Beit HaMikdash. So Ezra and Nehemiah rebuild the temple. The people who came back were very poor. The wealthy Jews stayed in Bovel. They didn't come back. And because of that, therefore, the structure that was built by Ezra and Nehemiah was, to put it mildly, a very modest one. It was made out of wood. It did not have any of the fancy artifacts. It did not have 10 menorahs the way Shlomo had. The Aron HaKodesh didn't exist anymore. So instead of the Aron HaKodesh, there was only the great rock, the Even Shasiya, on which Yitzchak, the Akedah, took place. But there was no Aron, there were no Kruvim. The Gemara lists 5 things that were missing already in the second temple of the Nevuah. It was a different level. And both the Tanakh and the Gemara tell us that Skenim Shavo Sador, the elderly people, there were people still alive who remembered the first Beis HaMikdash. So they wept not out of joy when the second Beis HaMikdash was dedicated, but out of shame. Because the first Beis HaMikdash was this magnificent building that Shlomo HaMelech built, gold, marble. And this second Beis HaMikdash was puny in comparison. But it was a Beis HaMikdash. And again, it was basically a wooden building. When Alexander the Great came to Jerusalem, and he spared the temple and the city of Jerusalem, but the Greeks did not allow the Beis HaMikdash to be refurbished. And in fact, as we know from the story of Hanukkah, they defiled the Beit HaMikdash. They put up the statue of Zeus in its precincts. They sacrificed to pagan gods. It was the low Shmeim fought against it. and were triumphant, and they cleansed the Beis Hamikdash from the idolatry. And the kings of the Hashmonaim kings reigned for 103 years. And they were very powerful, especially under the reign of Alexander Yanai. The empire of the Hashmonaim not only encompassed all of the land of Israel, but parts of Lebanon and Syria today. So they constantly refurbished the Beit HaMikdash. They made it a stone building. They enlarged it. However, when the Hashmonaim disappeared and the Roman puppets became the governors of Judea, to first Antipater and then his son Herod the Great. Anybody who calls himself the Great automatically have a problem with it. So Herod was determined. The Jewish people didn't like Herod for many reasons. He was corrupt, he was a murderer. His Jewish ancestry was questionable. He himself eradicated all of the descendants of the Hashmonaim. The Sanhedrin once judged him to be executed for murder, but they did not have the power to enforce it. So he wanted to ingratiate himself with the Jewish people. So what do leaders do to gain the favor of the people? They pick up the garbage, clean the streets, what's euphemistically called infrastructure. And he rebuilt the Beis Hamikdash. And he rebuilt the Beis Hamikdash as a tourist site. It was one of the wonders of the ancient world. It's mentioned by everyone of that time. And this is, he comes to power 100 years before the Khurban. And he made a magnificent building, which he financed in taxes off the backs of the Jewish people. But he had the great stonemasons, and he built what he thought was a fireproof building. The Gemara says that he imported Carrara marble from Italy to be the floor of the Beis Hamikdash. And the Carrara marble always has a blue streak in it. And when the sun shines on it, it looks like the rolling waves of the sea. It was the Chazal say, Misha lo ra binyan hurdes lo ra binyan noam yomav. If you didn't see what the second temple looked like, you don't know what a beautiful building looks like. And this is an age where you have the Parthenon, and you have all of the other great buildings of the ancient world. And this was Herod's building. Herod was a great builder, and he was a great murderer. And all over the country, we have pieces of Herod still left. Herodian, the building over, part of the building over the Morris HaMachpelas from Herod in Hebron. And all of this was on the backs of the people. He didn't spend his own money. So the second Beis Hamikdash was really built in its magnificence by the extortion of the people, by the oppression of the people. Enormous taxes, all to create this great edifice, pieces of which still exist for us today. The archaeologists and the Rabbonim today all have a discussion. Is the Kotel Maaravi really the Kotel Maaravi? There's great opinion that it is not. And that the real Kotel Maaravi is 30, 40 meters farther inside. And this is a different way. We don't know anything. You know, the outer wall from the eastern side, the steps that led up, that's still visible to us. And you have these enormous stones, unbelievable in size. And he built it with slave labor. Now, if you build a Beit HaMikdash with slave labor, so then Chazal said already, they knew from the beginning that this Beit HaMikdash was not going to last. But when Vespasian and Titus came to destroy the temple, they wanted to preserve the building. And Josephus says it in his whole description. And by accident, and there is no accident, it's all min hashamayim. One of the Roman soldiers threw a torch that caught on one of the great tapestries that hung inside the Heichel. The Herod had great curtains that matched the parochas. And that tapestry caught it on fire. And somehow the fire raged to such an extent that the stones melted. That's something that science, so to speak, explains to us that at a certain heat you can melt stone. And that's how great the fire was. And the building collapsed. The foundations of the building, the lower parts of the wall still stood. They stood until the second and third centuries. Jews still came there and sprayed there because you could still see the outlines. So then the question arises, what about the Bayit Shlishi? So how is that going to happen? And we want to make certain that it does not meet the fate of the first two. So on that, there are differences of opinion. So we'll discuss that tomorrow, God willing, as to the differences of opinion regarding the Bayit Shlishi and what practical elements of that affect us today, especially those of us that live here in Yerushalayim and have some access to what is called the Temple Mount. So we'll talk about that tomorrow, Amir Tishem. Chananya ben Akashi, Omer Rotza, Kodesh Baruch Hu, Lezakas, Israel, Lefrichoch, Yirbalahim, Torah, Mitzvot, Shenem, Adonai, Chabet, Saman, Tzidko, Yagil, Torah,
Amen.